Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Clive McKegg. I grew up around Whangarei, and I've spent time living in beautiful Kaikoui and in Doubtless Bay. My wife comes from Doubtless Bay and my children were born up there. I'm one of the trustees of local Food Northland along with Peter and Jeff. And as we reach the end of our time together, I want to start bringing together all that we've talked about. In the past, the standard thinking has been for increasing economic well-being in Northland, as I'm accountant, I think in those sort of terms, has been to increase exports, get more tourism, get overseas investment. That's kind of been the standard model, right? But in the last few years, I've been thinking more in terms of, there's other options. What if there's a more sustainable path to a vibrant economy with full employment? Maybe not so flashy, maybe, but better for more of us. I've got somebody else's phone going off here. And I read a book a number of years ago, and I brought my half my library here. I couldn't come on my motorbike today. I had to bring my truck to carry all my books. So this is a book I got off trade me from the Otaki Public Library a few years ago, but it's by a guy called Michael Shuman. And Jeff used this quote before, which I think is going to go up there shortly. I know it's late in the afternoon. So, and he says, going local does not mean walling off the outside world. It means nurturing locally owned businesses which use local resources sustainably, employs local workers at decent wages, and serve primarily local customers. It means becoming more self-sufficient, less dependent on imports. Control moves from the boardrooms of distant corporations and back to the community where it belongs. So that's kind of formed one of the centres of my work in this whole relocalisation. So what Michael Shuman does is he's a consultant. He gives all sorts of stories from around the world where he's worked on communities, often in North America, sort of post-industrial communities that have lost their heart because the Caterpillar factories closed down or whatever, and there's all these people who've never been entrepreneurs before. They've relied on the big company to feed them, and the big company's gone. It's been outsourced to Mexico or China or wherever, and he comes in there and he helps them to recover to get their kaha back, to recover their what they've lost, and to figure out that, hey, all is not lost. We can do this, and it's actually good for communities to gain their resilience back, to realise, hey, we can do this. We've got the resources here. We can pull this together. So he gives some great examples of people that have come out of this loss of autonomy, community powerlessness, and worsening social and economic outcomes. People that have been hooked up to this train wreck that's the global economy. And to me, the whole thing with relocalisation is that, hey, if we want to be part of the train wreck, we can put all our trust in distant corporations that are from other places, or we can unhook our carriage and say, hey, look, yeah, we can enjoy some of the parts of globalisation. There's a lot of things in globalisation that's not evil, but when we put our complete future in the hands of somebody in a boardroom and some other part of the world, we're just being stupid, really, I think. So another quote from him, he says, the only way communities can ensure their economic well-being is to stop chasing multinational firms with no community loyalties and start investing in community corporations. Prosperity follows when ownership, production and consumption become intimately connected with place. And that's what we're talking about here, because people care. It's easy to be exploitive when you can't see the people that are making your goods in China or in Bangladesh. You don't see the factories they're working in that create these clothes. But if that was somebody who lived down the road from you, you'd probably care. You'd be pretty hard-hearted to see a sweatshop in Whangarei where people are working for nothing and it falls over on them. So when we're connected with place, there's just a natural compassion that comes with that. So what Shuman suggests is that the following approach: to develop clear shared values and goals to benefit our region over as wide a consensus as possible, to assess our assets and resources and then build those up through minimising leakage and enhancing cooperation between local government, business, training institutions, and out of that to develop a new normal. So really all the things we've talked about all this. So my talk is really just summarising all the things we've discussed so far and maybe just trying to put them into a package here. So he gives some amazing examples of cities and regions where this has become a new normal, where people have got their kaha back. So his hypothesis is that the costs of courting large-scale overseas investment is too high and the advantages are temporary at best. A long-term, robust economy is founded instead on solid, locally owned, sustainable businesses. So in the final chapter of this book, he goes into 10 steps towards relocalisation, which I did a paper on a couple of years ago, which applied those 10 steps to Northland, and I've revisited this for this talk. And it's been really exciting to see how far we've even come in 2 years. I'm not going to go through all the 10 steps, but I'm going to go through maybe the first 4, depending on when my alarm goes off. But I was thinking about this, and I was thinking it's like, there's like the 12-step program, the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step. Well, this is like a 10-step program, and it's kind of the same thing. We've become addicted to this global economy where we have to have our shiny stuff, don't we? And it's like, well, at any cost, at the cost of the planet, we have to have our shiny stuff, and to kind of come to our senses and realise this is not working, like what Ken was talking about before. In fact, it's killing us. It's a short, sharp shock. And so, and in fact, some of the books I've studied, this one here, has anybody read this guy, Bruce Anderson, Globalisation of Addiction? Interesting, eh? He's the guy that did the Rat Park experiments. I don't know if you've heard about the Rat Park experiments about addiction, where they give the rats heroin or water to choose from, and everybody assumed that heroin was really addictive because the rats would go for the heroin. But then what he said is, well, maybe the rats are going for the heroin because they're living in this horrible little cage where life just sucks, and they might as well take drugs, kind of thing. And so what he did was he created this beautiful thing called Rat Park, which was like rat paradise, a Garden of Eden for rats, and they could just do whatever they liked. They could hang out with their mates, and they could have food, and they didn't bother with the heroin anymore. They drank the water instead. So it's kind of this model. It's true story. And this has kind of changed the view of addiction. And you get the same thing when guys went off to war, to Vietnam, for example. Apparently a large proportion of them were drug, what we would call drug addicts, but as soon as they came back out of that high pressure situation, it wasn't an issue, they just moved on with life. And he talks about this social dislocation. When anybody's in a high pressure situation, they will tend to, the quality of life will drop, and addiction is often the outcome. He talks about various situations where he's looked at this, and of course the classic example is colonisation, because all colonised people exhibit the same tendencies towards powerlessness and addiction, right? And this is part of what's happened. And so his hypothesis is that globalisation is basically colonisation 2.0. What globalisation has done is ripped our societies apart to such a degree. We've lost our heart, we've lost our sense of well-being, because all our social structures have been destroyed. We don't know how to cook our own food anymore. We're like those rats living in that nasty little environment where we've lost community, we've lost the things that give us joy and feed our souls. And so he says this, he says, dislocation is a condition of a great number of human beings who have been shorn from their cultures and individual identities by the globalisation of the free market society, in which the needs of the people are subordinated to the imperatives of the markets and the economy. Dislocation afflicts both people who have been physically displaced, such as economic immigrants and refugees, and people who have remained in place while their cultures disintegrated around them. Dislocation occurs during boom times as well as recessions, among the rich as well as the poor, among capitalists as well as workers. So his hypothesis is that's why we're seeing such a huge amount of addiction, and not just classic addiction, but things like, video game addiction and TV addiction and work addiction and all these kind of things. So for the rest of my talk today, I just want to look at the four first steps that he says, which is kind of the how of relocalisation. So the first step is to, I've got another quote here from another author. Go back to that one. As we move further down the road to giantism, globalism and dependence, we make it harder and harder to back up and take another path. If we lose our skills, our productive base, our culture, our traditions, our natural resources, if we erode the bonds of personal and familial responsibility, it becomes even more difficult to recreate community. It's very, very hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And if we lose all these skills of how to grow things and how to make things, it is hard. It is hard to get them back. And that's why, this is such a hard thing that we're doing, because it's taken generations to happen. And so it'll probably take generations to get it back if we have generations to do it. That's why this has got to be like a long game that we're playing here, because we're not going to fix this. We're not going to fix our social problems in a couple of years of doing this. This is going to take a long time because it's developed at a very systemic level. So the first thing he suggests is developing what he calls a community bill of rights, or identifying shared values. So by this he means developing a shared vision for a better future, asking questions like, what do we want to produce? How? Where? What kinds of goods and services are necessities? What should be our standard of worker rights and wages? What should be our stand on preserving land, water and sea? What kind of ownership structures will best serve our community well-being? So he says that the Community Bill of Rights enables residents to assert fundamentally that ends come before means, that businesses are welcome if they serve the community. And this reminds me of what Nangi Marie was saying yesterday about flipping it upside down. Ends comes before means. So it creates a set of public norms, like tikanga, like she was talking about it, commercial behaviour. A business's faithfulness to the rights, while voluntary, carries consequences. Every time a citizen considers making a purchase, he or she will have a list of qualifying companies in mind. And this is where the idea of having a bit of a database of people that subscribe to these values. Well, I'm going to deal with this person because they believe in community. And so what you have here is we get to choose to vote. Thanks, Peter. Not just vote in the local elections, but we get to vote with our spending. We get to vote by every time we spend money at the market rather than at the on some other kind of food. And if we just start doing this, it's something that we don't have to wait to get government funding for. We can just start changing our habits and start developing new habits. And when you think about this, if our goal was the maximisation of short-term wealth into the hands of a few people, then it would make total sense to sell off our capital assets or to exploit them as quickly as possible, to treat our communities and our people and environment as raw materials to be burned up and discarded. And who would do that? Of course, very few would see that as desirable. Yet often it seems that the need for short-term results kind of demands this. And our global markets push us to a survivalism where we don't have the time to think about the well-being of our community. We're just getting by. So if, on the other hand, the long-term well-being of our place and our descendants was our goal, we would do our best to preserve and build up our capital, all sorts of capital. We would ensure we maintained our diversity of skill sets, our diversity of agriculture, our diversity of horticulture and manufacturing. We would preserve our waterways, we'd preserve our seas, we'd preserve our groundwater, we'd preserve our air and soil. We would ensure that our fishing grounds and forests were harvested in a way that increased rather than decreased their long-term viability. We'd retain local ownership of lands and businesses. We would ensure that irreplaceable resources like minerals were used in a way that would enable them to be recycled to get the maximum value. I mean, all these things are kind of, I'm preaching to the converted here. Obviously, this is not the way that most people view things. And of course, these values resonate with what Rangi Marie was talking about yesterday in terms of Māori tikanga. She has a quote here from her paper that she was talking about. Uppermost is the sanctity of life because of divine origins, thus the obligation to uphold the mana and well-being of people and the life-supporting capacity of Papatūānuku in perpetuity is non-negotiable, which is a total sustainability statement, isn't it? So some of the values that we identified, and we put this in our business plan of local Food Northland, were retaining local ownership. So these are talking about shared values, which kind of inviting you guys, and you probably already do share these values. Retaining local ownership of our lands and businesses to the greatest degree possible, reducing leakage of wealth out of the region and enhancing self-determination. Maintaining a diversity of skill sets in such areas as agriculture, horticulture and manufacturing to reduce dependence on fragile and expensive supply chains and increase local jobs. Optimising irreplaceable resources by using/recycling them in a way that enables them to be of use to future generations. Preserving and enhancing our waterways, seas, groundwater, air and soil so that they will continue to meet the needs of our descendants. Ensuring our fishing grounds and forests are harvested in a way that increases rather than decreases their long-term viability. And rethinking all our processes at an overall systems level so as to eliminate or at least minimise waste, which is what Lopipa is working on. And education and training around the benefits of relocalisation backed by sound research to change the entrenched Tina mindset. And he's Tina in his book is There Is No Alternative. And you talk to so many people and they say, oh, you can't really do that, that's not going to work, we can't change those things. And of course, you're just a dreamer, you're just dreaming, mate. But this is what we're talking about here is being dreamers. It's okay to be a dreamer. We don't have to come up with the answers, we just come up with better questions. It's okay. So one of the things we've started on, which Sean kind of talked about, was we've started a networking database for Northland organisations who subscribe to these kind of values built on local ownership, and we were hoping he'd be able to demo it here, but he got busy in the kitchen. But what we're going to do is invite everybody who's interested to be on that database and to share in there what your inputs and outputs are. So you might have certain things that you need for your business or your production or whatever, and it can be all sorts of things, and things that are your outputs, and your outputs are not necessarily what you produce in terms of, you might produce strawberries, for instance, but you might also have an output of what you would term to be waste. So I haven't thought of an example. If you've got horses, for example, you've got horse manure. To you it's waste, but to somebody else it's a resource. So inputs and outputs, and so the idea is you list those on there, and those are searchable, and you can match people up. So, but this is all sort of people who are subscribing to these values, because if you can deal with other people who have these values, it helps you to encourage this kind of new economy. But it also identifies gaps where it's like, there's no such and such, there's nobody, I can't get seaweed from anywhere. If somebody actually did some seaweed fertiliser, I could use that. So it's like, well, there's a business opportunity. Somebody can do that. So so as Jeff said, this is about co-opetition rather than cooperation. There's Jeff's word again. A couple of years ago, Joseph and Northland Inc. got a cluster specialist, which we went to, and he said, he had this quote from his work. She said, from an economic development perspective, the evidence is clear that with strong clusters comes growth and employment. Economies with strong clusters have higher levels of innovation, higher productivity, more entrepreneurship, more new business startups, higher export and economic growth, higher wages and better productivity. And the essence of a cluster is like a co-opetition kind of thing, where we're doing aggregation, we're we're developing these things like hubs. So, and a lot of, there were some great examples in that of people from all around the world who were doing just fantastic things by aggregating what they were doing. The number 2 is taking stock, which is a State of the Region report. This is about taking stock of our city, town or region, of what it is and has. So each community has resources, assets and culture that are capable of being revived and empowered. And Shuman says virtually every community has a gold mine which economists have yet to discover. Along its veins and other deposits may be found unemployed human resources, underused civic institutions, discarded economic assets, many kind of human assets now lie fallow. The inventiveness of the young, the forgotten skills of the retirees, tally the inanimate objects that have all but been written off, empty buildings, idle machinery, wasted energy. And so this is kind of part of what somebody needs to do is to, and this is part of what we were talking about of just gathering this information of what's out there. And what do we need to do to identify the gaps in that and identify the resources that we have. Just looked at my clock. I don't know where the time's gone, but I've got 3 minutes left, so I'm flicking ahead here. I'm going to stick to it. So the Tautokotau Northland Regional Growth Study said while the report recognises that there is no silver bullet or industry that will transform the Northland economy, it recognises that the Northland region has significant untapped potential. And in some ways it's good that there's no silver bullet. There's just a lot of small opportunities, because that way we avoid monoculture. My tupuna came from Ireland around about just after the potato famine. And that was a classic case of industrial economy making it too hard for people to survive in a monoculture, and 1 million people died of famine. So these things are not new. So just next one, Peter, we'll just look at the slides. Just flick ahead on that. So the third step is identify who's leading the way and learn from them. So we'll just go through the slides here. So he says the existence of 1 or 2 successful community corporations using local inputs, producing quality goods, operating in harmony with the environment, selling to local consumers, treating workers well, delivering profit to local shareholders, should inspire others to follow. As they increase the demand for inputs and production, new firms will be motivated to set up shop. And so we've got some great examples in Northland of people who've gone before us, like Seabeck, North Power's locally owned. We've got the Growers Market here. We've got Mike's work in Kaikoui. We've got Sean with the Whangarei Food Co-op. We've got George with the Fresh Food Collective. We've got these restaurants that are trying to do the local. So quick, that's good. So just flick past those questions. We haven't got time for them. They're kind of obvious. And the fourth one was business schools, and this is. Just go back, not that quick, Pete. I'm not that desperate. I've got a bit at 40. So this is community-friendly business schools. So basically, this is happening. You know, we've got the Makina Foundation from Wellington base, where they came up and they did some amazing training. We've got North Tech giving us these facilities today. We've got Johns Hopkins University who's allowed Anne to come over. Fantastic. We've got just yeah. Oh yeah, that slide there is just a slide I like about. Move on. I've got time to talk about that. So and Massey, then input from Massey University, which is great, and the connections that are being made there, and it's just awesome to see these high-end training institutions who are starting to get this sustainability thing and starting to change the paradigm. And once graduates start coming out who start thinking like this, you know, it's going to be fantastic. This book here, I haven't got time to talk about it either, but this is by Jane Gleason White. The revolution capitalism has to have, or can accountants save the planet? I like to think so. Accountants with soul. but this is all about changing the way that we report on things, and so when you reduce everything into money, you can become really hard-hearted about making decisions because it's all about bottom line in terms of money. Oops.
Appropriate that the last word of the accountant was money.
I know. Yeah. I'll let you guys fill in the blanks on that, but yeah.
You gotta know.
Okay, what's next? From here. Okay. Oh, okay, this is a fantastic quote. Wendell Berry. The standard of the exploiter is efficiency. The standard of the nurturer is care. The exploiter's goal is money, profit. The nurturer's goal is health. The land's health, his own, his family's, his communities, his country's. The exploiter wishes to learn as much as possible by as little work as possible. The nurturer expects certainly to have a decent living from his work, but his characteristic wish is to work as well as possible. And if you haven't read his stuff, he's a great inspiration. One of his quotes that I love is that what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. And I mean, that just sums up so much. The way we treat our soil, the way we treat it is the way we treat our people. It's the way we treat our own soul. If our soil is depleted, our communities will be depleted, our own souls will be depleted. And which comes first? I don't know. It's probably all works together. So the way our land is, the way our whenua is the way we are. And so if we can start reversing some of these things, we can start seeing it come back. So I was just thinking in terms of the metaphor about the 12-step program, and in the 12-step program you've got these steps like admitting that you can't control your addiction or compulsion. So we're trapped in this unsustainable system that's out of control, and then we recognise that only a higher power can give us strength, and examine past errors with the help of a sponsor. So Anne and Barbara, like our sponsors, where we can help us out of our addictions. Making amends for our errors, that we're sorry that what we've done to our lands, our waterways, and our people. Learning a new life with a new code of behaviour, and helping others who suffer from the same addictions and compulsions. So that's our challenge, to help others who suffer from the same addictions and compulsions.